Hello, everybody. What we're going to show you today is a kind of two-story building. The ground floor is a software product that we happen to release just today. It's named Comindware Suite, and it contains a Comindware Process as a component, which is pretty typical BPM suite. But the more interesting part is the development prototype of the new version of our product, which is going to close certain gaps in current BPM technologies. The gap number one is the gap between architecture and execution. The common question that many BPMN users ask is, how can we model the process hierarchy on the levels above a single process? And the honest answer is you can't. You can't do it with BPMN. You should switch to enterprise architecture tool. It would be okay, but we hit the round-trip problem here. Just a brief reminder, what is the round-trip problem? It happens when you have different representations of the same entity, where you model process, say, in ARIS and execute it in SAP. And these two representations evolve over time, and sooner or later, then they diverge and conflict. BPMN answers this issue by proposing the so-called executable BPMN. So if you want to change something in the process, you should go to the process model and change it there. Now, what we have at the architecture level? Actually, it's the same round-trip problem again. We have two sources of truth. Each of them evolve independently, and they diverge from each other. So we are going to answer this issue by proposing the so-called executable architecture. So basically, what we do, we add an architecture diagram to BPMN. Here is the example of sales pipeline process. We can see capabilities groups, and resources here. Capability groups can be navigated up and down to BPMN diagram. But BPMN process is not the only way to implement a given capability. We also support projects and cases. There was a pretty big discussion recently at BP Trends LinkedIn group, and Paul Harman proposed to view capability as an abstract process, a name without internals. And this is basically what we did. The difference in our approach is that we don't like to call every kind of activity a process. We believe that business people differentiate process management from project management. So in our system, capability can be mapped to different entities. And as for resources, they are mapped to data. And it's not just modeling. It defines execution. It defines what the user can do. As an example, if you have a sales lead capability or a process which transforms unqualified lead to qualified lead, then when user wants to have more qualified leads, system prompts him with the way to do it, to start the process. And that was a pull scenario. In a push scenario, user starts from existing object from unqualified lead, and system gives him a way to what he can do with this object. So this is what we call executable architecture. What we model at the architecture level directly affects what user may or may not do. And we believe that it is very important. This is the only way to make the architecture relevant. You shouldn't fix things on execution level. You should go to architecture. And this is also an alternative way to start a process. Not by start a new process button common for existing BPM suites. So to summarize the things, here are the three gaps we are going to close. Gap number one is between architecture managed in enterprise architecture tool and execution in BPM suite. We get them together. Gap number two is between different form of collaborative work, between projects, process, and cases. And gap number three is between natural experience of business users who really don't start processes in real life, and the typical way that BPM suites suggest. And why we believe that architecture is important. Here is a recent research from BP Trends showing that the average BPM maturity actually goes down during the last years, and this is very disappointing. One of the reasons why it may be so is that, as I said, BPM suites do not support the architecture. So as a result, they do not support organization wanting to get to higher level of BPM maturity. And this is exactly the issue we're going to address with our product.
So for the purpose of this demonstration, let us suppose that we have a company that is selling software products and services. And here is the end-to-end process that they have. We're in Comindware Suite right now, and you see a lot of stuff on the left, but what we're really interested in right now is we're interested in sales pipeline, right? And so this is end-to-end process, and they call it sales pipeline. It could be called a sales funnel. And what do we see here? So we have resources, like Anatoly mentioned. We're dealing with resources like qualified lead, opportunity, verbal commitment, etc. Also, besides resources, we deal with capabilities.
So it's an old representation of processes that get some resources and input and transform them into some output. Unfortunately, this view was lost in BPMN, but we believe that it's very intuitive for business users, so we're basically getting it back. And sorry for these arrows that are hardly visible, but let me comment on these too. They may look similar to BPMN control flows, but I must say that they are not. They do not show the sequence of execution. They just show inputs and outputs. All these capabilities, all these processes behind them may be and probably would be executed asynchronously and simultaneously. So it's not the sequence of execution. It's just relationship of inputs and outputs.
These capabilities, they could be atomic capabilities, like request for proposal, for example, or this could be capability groups. And we can dig into capability groups and see what is there. So let us get a brief overview of the process. So we're getting into develop a lead capability group, and we see how the company generates leads basically. So there are two flows. The first one through the online content. This is kind of basic flow. And there is an active flow through visiting vendor events and industrial conferences. So, but all of them, all these two flows, they're generating unqualified leads as a result. And let us see what we're doing next in this process. So then we are working with the lead, we're identifying opportunity. Within identifying opportunity capability group, we're dealing with business needs. So it is a really important resource here. We're defining what is really required for the customer, and then proceeding to the final step, we're getting to the signed order. So this is a brief overview of the sales process that we have here.
And let me add a few words that these resources may also be considered as a major milestones of this process. And a few words about terms. A business person would probably call all these chain of activities a process. From technical perspective, technicians, when technicians use term process, they mostly mean the BPMN process. So in our product, when we're saying process, it's really BPMN process. And when we want to generalize, we use term capability, which can be different kind of collaborative work.
And it actually means that we're implementing this end-to-end sales process in business terms, with not just only BPMN processes, but also with projects and cases. So we're starting with creating these abstract capabilities, and they're basically defining what should be done. And then we're mapping them to specific processes, specific projects and cases. And by this mapping, we're defining how we should do that. So let's see how it works. So we have an assess lead capability here, and let me define this capability should be implemented as a process. So I'm first selecting that it should be a process, and other options are case and project here. And then I'm selecting that this should be this particular process called lead assessment. So I'm setting, I'm going back, and after this mapping, I can just go deep here and dig into this capability and see that this is a BPMN process. This is a pretty basic BPMN process, so let us not waste a lot of time on this, or there are just 3 swimming lanes, there are 3 departments working on the lead and defining whether it's a good lead or not that good lead. So this process is pretty basic. Let me go back to the architecture and talk about resource mapping. So I mentioned that we're mapping abstract capabilities to specific processes, projects, and cases. And besides that, we're mapping these resources to specific data object rights. Resource, this is a term from architecture view. And it corresponds to a class of business objects or record types in the terms of Comindware. So let us map this abstract resource to a specific record type. So I'm going deep into unqualified lead resource, and I'm first defining that it is mapped to a record type called lead. And to be precise, we are mapping it not just to a record type, but to a record type plus a filter. So we are saying that this is first a lead, and then this is an unqualified lead. So we're defining that. And let us go and check this record type definition. So we're working not just with processes, projects, and cases, we are dealing with data. And this is basically a record management system. So I can go here and define the entity itself.
It's worth to mention here that we rely on our own graph database in storing and retrieving data. And it has a big advantage to being able to change the data model on the fly. As an example, let's add some attribute to our record type. Hot lead Boolean attribute. So in a second, then we can adjust the form, add it to the form, and here we are. And you can also see that we implemented a full-blown development environment within the browser. We consider it, it wasn't an easy decision for us, but it's an important thing because you don't need to install, you don't need to set up the software, you just sign up, and in a second you can develop your solution. That's why we choose this class. Okay, we just seen the system from architect's point of view, from a process designer's point of view. Now let's switch to end user's perspective. Look at from his eyes.
Yeah. So let us suppose that we are feeding sales pipeline with leads. And I'm a manager who is responsible for that, and I see that we have got some qualified leads, and I want to create more qualified leads. Right? I'm clicking here, I have some possible actions, and one of the actions I have is to start lead assessment. And remember, in the architecture view, we defined that qualified lead record is output of a lead assessment process. So that's how architecture defines the end user interface. So exactly because this architecture defined, we see this action here. So let me click on that, and let me start the process. After the process is started, I can go to see my tasks just in any BPM, so it's not as interesting. So it's a pull scenario. So we're pulling leads from unqualified leads to qualified leads. Also, we can work with the push scenario. So let me open not qualified leads, but unqualified leads. Let me open some particular lead. And I will have a button here called actions. And once again, it is defined by the architecture. So architecture is saying that what I can do with this particular object, with this class of objects actually, I can send it to lead assessment process. So that's the scenario number 2, push scenario. The first scenario, the most interesting scenario actually is exactly this round trip between architecture and execution. So we're looking at the list of unqualified leads, and we are thinking, okay, how we can create more unqualified leads. We see 3 options there. Once again, they're defined by the architecture. And let us suppose that this is just not enough for us. We need to add more capabilities to generate unqualified leads because these are not creating suitable number of leads. And to do that, we're switching to architecture. We're switching to sales pipeline chart. And let us go to develop lead capability group. Let us go to generate lead capability group. And you see that there are 2 capabilities here, generating unqualified leads. We'll be adding 3rd capability. Well, actually, it is already here. We'll just map it to a specific process. So I'm going to settings. First, I'm defining that it is a process, not a case or a project or an abstract capability. And then I'm just selecting specific BPMN process that has been prepared beforehand. So I'm mapping this capability to a specific BPMN process. Let me go back. And let me actually go to the list of unqualified leads. And we'll see that this option has been added here. So by defining architecture, by defining the end user interface. That's the link.
So that's what we mean when saying about executable architecture. When you miss some capability on the execution level, you shouldn't try to work around it to patch your execution system. You should get back to architecture, align it to your need, and then execute accordingly. This is our strong belief that this is the only way to keep the architecture relevant. Otherwise, it will be some nice pictures deployed somewhere and having not a big relation to the reality.
To be precise, it is not that tight. So we made it loosely coupled system, and it means that you can use execution part without architecture part, so it's perfectly possible. But in this situation, you will be losing just two benefits. The first one is this high-level overview that we're getting with the architecture. And the second one is starting processes from objects, from real-life business objects. And without that, the solution basically downgrades to a basic standard BPMN, where you can just go to the process and click Start Process button.
We expect that some users may choose to use architecture and BPMN parts without execution, and this is, of course, possible too.
The last thing to show is core capabilities of the platform. As I mentioned, we're covering not just BPMN processes, but also other types of collaborative work, like projects and cases. And the benefit is that end user can work with a unified task list, so all the tasks that are generated in projects, processes, and cases, they are all getting here. And as a user, I see the unified task list. And this is actually opening the road to the unified resource management. So we can manage resources that are working on different type of collaborative work. And the second big benefit is a single social environment, single social network. It means that all the employees that are working in the system, they're collaborating on different types of collaborative work in a single interface, and all the updates are getting into the single stream, so it's a single social environment.
Yeah, we take this social challenge very seriously. We believe that it's much more than another checkbox in standard vendors comparison list. It's actually a game changer. For example, we don't see much sense in injecting social functionality into some existing BPM suite. Why? Because nobody will need several social environments in a single company. Say one for processes, one for projects, one for cases. It just doesn't make sense. You should unify your work. And we're also skeptical about things like Facebook at work, because social at work is not about friending ourselves or friending our colleagues. It's about subscribing to work objects, to work item, to specific process instance, to specific task or specific process model. So in Comindware, we are going to make any such work object a kind of virtual room. We can gather here to discuss some issue, we can subscribe to it, we can write to it, and working together all the time. So this is what we wanted to show you today. Thank you for your attention. We are open to your questions.